Good evening, YouTube. Salutations. So, I've been planning on doing some author features on my channel, and I plan to talk about a few of them. I've mentioned this a few times, but I plan to do more videos on like Bernard Cornwell and Wilbur Smith and Patrick O'Brien, which are like my triumvirate, right? Bernard Cornwell being my favorite. But I also want to talk about some other authors I really like. I'll probably talk about Con Ingleton sometime too. I've read quite a few Con Ingleton's here. I've read a lot of his stuff. Really great author. I don't love all of his stuff, but anyway, so I just plan to make a series of videos about many of these authors coming up, especially as I reread some of their stuff and read some stuff I haven't even read by them. But one I want to talk about, and I apologize here, because I want to get the cover. I want to show you guys the cover to this. An author I've only recently discovered. I was aware of him, but I've really enjoyed it. I think I got a pretty good sample size of his stuff, right? So this is Buccaneer Coast by James L. Nelson. I apologize for the glare there. That's the cover right there, though. Buccaneer Coast by James L. Nelson. So this is the first one in a series. There's two of them. The second one's Tortuga. This first one's about 500 pages. So, like I said, these are the only two books I've read. This Buccaneer Coast and the second one, which is Tortuga. I read them right back to back. And again, I've been wanting to read this author for a while. I was aware of him. I was actually wanting to read Brethren of the Coast, which is probably the series he's most well known for, which is very much a pirate story, set in the 1600s. So that's how I was aware of him, and I'd heard people talk about that series and recommend it before. But this was on Kindle Unlimited, so I was like, well, I think I'll just try this. I have Kindle Unlimited. And I'll tell you what, I was pleasantly surprised by this. I finished both of these books last week. So like I said, I read this first one, the first one, Buccaneer Coast right here. That's a 500-page book. I read that in 3 days while reading another book. I was reading, at that time I was reading Half-Drowned King too, and I've also started The War of the Roses by Dan Jones. So I found this really enjoyable, and I liked it so much, I read Tortuga immediately afterwards. And I think 2 books is a pretty good sample size of an author to get a decent impression of him. I plan to read more. He has a Viking series set in Ireland, which I believe the first one's called Fingal. I know one of them's named Dublin is the name of another one. And I'm going to read some of those as well. The only reason I didn't start on that one is because I was reading The Half-Drowned King at the time, and I didn't want to read 2 Viking stories right next to each other like that. But anyway, so this first one, pretty much the main character we follow is a Frenchman named LeBeef, or LeBeuf. It's a French name, and there's a bit of a mystery to this character throughout the whole time. You're not quite sure how he ended up there. So they're stranded. He's not stranded. I don't know how he got there, but essentially he is stranded because he has no way of getting off the island. But they're on Hispaniola, which is modern day Dominican Republic and Haiti, and he's on a part of the island that's referred to as the Buccaneer Coast, right? And that's kind of where the name the Buccaneers come from. It's an Anglicism of a French word. Anyway, so it's not just him there. There's a whole bunch of other people there of all kinds of ethnicities. There's a Dutchman that's a pretty prevalent character there, but mostly it's French speaking. That part is right, and this is the Spanish Empire. This is I think the book is set around 1630 or 1650, right around that time. And the French and the English and the Dutch are starting to encroach on this, these Spanish territories because Spain is no longer capable of maintaining and protecting and enforcing any actual law in the Caribbean for the most part. So everything's kind of up for grabs, and that's kind of what's going on. And that's in the backdrop of the story, right? That's going on. And there's some real historical events that happen around this time. Because eventually, at some point later in the book, the Spanish Armada shows up, right? Which happens in the second one. But in this one, you're kind of just getting to know LeBeef. Like the very first scene is they're pig hunters, and what they do is they'll hunt these pigs and smoke them, and then they trade them, and that's kind of how they make a living, is hunting and selling meat, right? Which makes sense for the time. Food wasn't the easiest thing to come by, and it's usually ships and shipmen that come and trade them. So anyway, and the guy is, and right from the beginning, he's really taciturn. He doesn't speak much, and he's kind of known for that. But there's things that are that are alluded to. He's really good with the sword. He's a really good shot. And when I say good with the sword, he's not just good at fighting with the sword. You can tell he's at professional training, right? Which is not normal in this time. And a theme of especially this first one is like, you shouldn't judge people just by their outward appearance, right? There's a subplot of a Spanish character that goes on throughout the book too, who misjudges somebody, and I'll come back to that here in a moment. I'll circle back on that. But if people people assume LaBeef is stupid because he does not speak much, right? So early on in the book, there's a hurricane happens, which is interesting too, right? Because you can just imagine what people in this day and age would have thought about something like a hurricane. This would have been a catastrophic event, and it is at the time. It destroys the entire Buccaneer camp. They go hide in this cave, and some other stuff is revealed when this happens. Anyway, so they hide in this cave, and after the hurricane destroys all their camp, and it doesn't just affect the Buccaneers; it affects a lot of people on the island. It destroys a lot of property, warehouses, causes issue for another character in the book who is. Graves is his name. He's a pirate or a privateer, whatever you want to call it. Privateers are just pirates who are allowed to do pirating. So, anyway, Graves is an English character. He speaks English, but he's a lifelong sailor and a seaman. So, anyway, but while LaBeef is the main character, there are other point of view characters. So there's Graves. There's another character that is heavily involved with Graves named Maha. Maha's not really a point of view character, but Maha is he's kind of he's a native of the Caribbean, but he's ethnically mixed. He's a really interesting character, and there's on top of using a sword, he uses another weapon called a butu, which is like a wooden club with a square this. I believe it's just the top portion of it is square, so you can hit somebody with the corner or the flat of it. And he's pretty good at it. It's a top-heavy weapon, so he's using a sword, which, if you know anything about older weapons, a sword is balanced at the hand, but weapons like maces and clubs are balanced at the top, right? And, of course, a mace or a club kind of plays more to raw strength, where a sword plays more to skill. But anyway, not that you can't use a sword as a bludgeoning weapon, but anyway, it's two slightly different things. Anyway, and Maha's good with both and uses both at the same time. Anyway, but Graves is this like really high level, seaman and captain and navigator. So obviously people see value in that. Maha captains a ship, but he's not really a seaman. But anyway, he's just more of a warrior and a good one at that. He knows enough. He's been on the sea, so he knows things. He's just not as good at it as Graves is. But there's the mystery of LaBeef throughout the whole book, right? And eventually, what happens is they come up after the hurricane. The hurricane just leads to all kinds of stuff, So this Spanish character, his name escapes me at the moment, but he crash lands on the island, which is where he was trying to go. He's been assigned an office of lieutenant general there, and he ends up getting to it. But the boat he was on carries a bunch of expensive cargo and gold and. These Buccaneers come across it. They don't find the gold right away, but they do find all this cargo, which is also highly valuable. And LaBeef ends up taking the boat as his share instead of any of the cargo, which the other Buccaneers think is stupid. But LaBeef ends up kind of tricking these people into helping them fix the boat, and they do end up getting it. They do end up fixing it and making it seaworthy again. But there's a little more to it than I won't give it away. Anyway, so. I'll talk about the Spanish character a bit too. So he is in the main island there, which is Santo Domingo, and he's introducing these characters. There's the mayor and the actual governor of the, because he's the lieutenant governor. So there's a governor, so he's the second highest ranking person there. But he judges the mayor as this fat, portly fellow who's really jovial and nice and. As just a typical lazy aristocrat and lazy nobility that is standard in the Spanish Empire. And he has these dreams of building this empire, and and it's said throughout the book by multiple characters that the Spanish Empire is no longer able to provide all the goods that that they need. So that's created a black market of people smuggling stuff, and people make a lot of money doing it, and that's his plan, right? But he misjudges the mayor. The mayor turns out to be this, not a nice guy, and has a lot of bad people working for him, and kind of tricks the Spanish character into a false sense of security. So anyway, but the book is just really great, man. Like I said, it was really a page turner. I read it super fast, and I enjoyed it a lot. So much so that I read Tortuga almost immediately. I won't get into much about the plot of Tortuga, but Tortuga is an island off of Hispaniola on the Haiti side, and they end up going there, and some things go on there. Part of when the Spanish character comes is he was given a land contract by the French king for a tobacco plantation on Tortuga, and LaBeef ends up having it, and he goes there. But anyway, so it doesn't quite work out for him. But anyway, and at that time, in the second book is when the Spanish Armada finally shows up, and they need supplies, and there's a whole plot about that. There's plot points about that, and getting them the supplies, and there's a lot of great stuff, man. There's a lot of these characters will get built up, and then bad stuff happens to them, and they fall back down, and it goes back and forth with them quite a bit. Not just LaBeef, but with the Spanish character and with other characters in the book, Graves, and it's obviously a pretty raw time for these guys. They get tortured and shot and beat up and get in fights, and it's just it's rough living. It's rough living for these guys. But it's a really great book. I had a lot of fun reading it, man. It was really enjoyable. Like I said, I read them both really fast. The second one's about, I want to say it was 437 pages, if I remember right. Something right about that. The first one's like 502, 503 pages. And I read them both in, the span of a week, less than a week. I probably read both of them in 6 days, like I said, on top of my other reading too. At least the way I do it, I always kind of have my main books I'm reading, and then supplementary reading that I do too. So those were kind of my main books I wanted to get through. So I read those. So I basically give them priority. But anyway, so I got through them pretty quick, and I really enjoyed them. And I'm going to be reading some more James L. Nelson, but I really want to feature him on the channel. I could see James L. Nelson cracking the some of my, at least my top 15 favorite authors. I'm going to read that Viking series. He has another one that's like a American Revolution at sea. That's called I don't. It might be Brothers at Arms, but it's something like that. But that looks really interesting too. And I can't think of a time I ever read a American Revolution at sea book, so that could be really interesting too. But the Viking Age in Ireland, so it kind of puts an interesting twist on some of this stuff. One thing about this book, if you haven't read a lot of seafaring stuff, there is a lot of seamanship stuff, a lot of terminology and descriptions of boats and boat parts. But he does put descriptions in the beginning of the book, and he puts a glossary in the back of boat terms. So, and I'm no seaman, right? I live in the Midwest, so I don't know a whole lot about sailing. But of course, I've read quite a few books that are set at sea and stuff. So I knew a lot of the terminology already. I've read a bunch of Patrick O'Brien and stuff, Moby Dick and all that. So I know some of those terms and the terminology and the boat parts and mechanics and stuff. And I just found it incredibly enjoyable, man. It is a pirate story, although they're on land a lot, so it's not like they're just always at sea. But I really enjoyed it a lot. I'm gonna read some more of his stuff, man. I don't know when he's releasing the next. I assume there's gonna be the ending of Tortuga is very open ended, and I think he ended both the books really well. But it's not wrapped up all nice and tight. So I assume there'll be another one. And I enjoyed it enough that I'll pick it up when it comes out. And I think that Viking Age in Ireland looks good. And like I said, that's on Kindle Unlimited. There's 10 of them. All of them are there. I might not read them all, consecutive, but I will definitely be checking it out and reading it. I probably will read all of them. It might take me a while, but I'll get to it. So, anyway, but I really want to feature him on the channel, man. I think he did a good job, and I think it was really entertaining. He's definitely worth your time. So if you like historical fiction, you like pirate stuff, you like Pirates of the Caribbean, this is right up your alley. But yeah, and that's like I said, that's kind of the plan of my channel. I'm going to do a feature on Dan Jones soon. I'm about done with War of the Roses. I picked up his Henry V book, and I'm gonna read that. I'm gonna check it out. probably after I read that, I'm gonna read Essex Dogs, which is his nonfiction, the first in his nonfiction series, and that'll be a good sample size for Dan Jones. And I'll probably talk about him too. I'll do a video on Dan Jones. So he's had an interesting career. He's worked in TV and stuff too. He was on a show that would show off British castles and stuff. That's how I knew. So that's how I knew who he was before I picked up War of the Roses. And I'd heard of Essex Dogs, which I plan on reading very soon as well. But I plan on talking about those two authors and then some others as well. I also want to talk about I already mentioned in the beginning of the video, but I'm going to do regular videos on Bernard Cornwell and Wilbur Smith, and probably Patrick O'Brien too, because those, especially Bernard Cornwell and Wilbur Smith, are my favorite authors. I haven't read Patrick O'Brien in a long time, but I'm going to reread the Aubrey Martin series. And I'm going to talk about it on the channel. So again, I think those authors deserve to be remembered. So, but yeah, I just wanted to talk about James L. Nelson a bit. Definitely, I think the first one's a little bit better. I'd probably give Buccaneer Coast like and this would be a pretty glowing review. I'll say an 8.7 out of 10, and I would give Tortuga probably like an 8.3 out of 10. Both are excellent, man. They're both great. I definitely highly recommend them. Are they kind of books I'll revisit for the rest of my life? I don't know, maybe, but I definitely like them enough to continue reading the stuff. So that should say something. So I don't just keep reading an author I don't like. And again, I immediately picked up Tortuga and read it. I read them right back to back. That's how much I enjoyed it. I was motivated because I wanted a good sample size of them, but I liked it. I had liked Buccaneer Coast enough to continue. So. I definitely plan to read more of his stuff. So, and I would recommend them to you guys. So I'll give them, we'll say 8.7 eye patches out of 10, and 8.3 eye patches out of 10 for the second one, Tortuga. Yeah, there's a lot of eye patches. There's a lot of pirate stuff in these books. There's a lot of shipboarding, fighting with swords and stuff. But they're good, man. They're fun. They're fun books, Like I said, a lot of Bhutan heads. Anyway, they're good stuff, man. Definitely check them out. Because I'm gonna read Brother Under the Coast too. So anyway, good night or good day, YouTube, wherever you're at.